Morning, everyone. Thanks for coming in. We're just gonna give some folks a minute to grab their coffees and come on.
You want to share the slides and have those up?
Yep.
Thanks.
I see some folks starting to put their name and organization into the chat. Thank you for doing that. If everyone could also just do that, that would be helpful. And I'm sure everyone's names are showing up good on their screen, but if you'd like to, you can go to that, hover over your screen and hit that three dot button in the corner and adjust your name if you'd like. All right, as people continue rolling on in, we can go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the 2024 Organics Regional Summit from King County. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and it'll be shared on the King County site after the next few days. Some meeting reminders. Please make sure that your name is updated on screen, name, organization, pronouns. Feel free to also share anything you might need to share in the chat. So name, organization, email, if you'd like folks to reach out to you afterwards with any questions. I believe most folks are muted, but please mute your microphone if you are not, especially when speakers are presenting. We'll have the opportunity for a Q&A afterwards. You can unmute yourself and ask a question. During the Q&A, just raise your hand via the chat and we can get to your question, or if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat as well. Some of our presenters might answer you directly, or we can address them later during the Q&A. If you have any technical issues, my colleague Dion Collins from C+C is on the call. Feel free to message him directly with any Zoom issues with audio or slides or anything that might be technically not working for you. But hopefully everyone has some solid internet connection this morning. For our agenda, we have a great lineup of speakers. I'm Sam from C+C. I'll be helping facilitate some of this meeting. We'll have a land acknowledgement from Kelsey Bailey at King County. We have Claudia from the EPA to talk about sustainable management of food. Eliza and Kelly from King County to share some updates. Then we'll have our Q&A and a brief bio break for those speakers. And then coming back with Tyler Morgan at Blue Glass Farm, Jade Monroe from Washington Department of Ecology, Jay from Cedar Grove, and another Q&A closing and wrap up. After that, we will have breakout rooms and optional networking sessions with some of our speakers who are still able to stay on the line. This is not required, but we encourage you to jump on and connect further if you'd like. Passing off to Kelsey.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. And again, thank you everyone for being here. We just wanted to kick off today with taking a moment for a grounding. So nothing ties us closer to the land than the food and the plants that we grow and consume. In the organic sphere, we have a responsibility to take care of the land and the resources it produces, and we have an even greater responsibility to the original stewards of this land. The Duwamish, Muckleshoot, Snoqualmie, Puyallup, Tulalip, and Suquamish tribes. There's an immense work to be done to undo past wrongs that force these groups from their ancestral land and diminish their ability to grow and nourish themselves with traditional foods. So, as we move forward, let us remember why we do this work. To not only to conserve the land and the resources, but to also honor and center the past and present stewards of the land and the stewards yet to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelsey. And I believe for our first part, we have Claudia Fabiano from the US EPA to present. Claudia, are you there?
Yeah, hi everybody. Good morning and thank you for having me. I am really excited to kick off today's summit, and I'm going to be sharing with you some of EPA's latest research and guidance and resources on wasted food, and looking forward to hearing any questions you have during the following Q&A. Next slide. So we have several roles to advance efforts to reduce wasted food in the US. Before I go into those, I do want to mention I am at EPA headquarters in Washington, DC, and I work in the Office of Land and Emergency Management in our Office of Resource Conservation and Recovery. However, you all hopefully are connected with the EPA regional office in Seattle. We've got many great folks working on these issues out of our Seattle Region 10 EPA office as well. I'm happy to put their emails in the chat when I'm done presenting in case you want to connect with them as well. So back to what our roles are in this space. We provide funding through grants and cooperative agreements to states, territories, tribes, and communities for infrastructure outreach and other programs. We also provide technical assistance. We facilitate peer networks. We publish toolkits and guidance and provide training to help entities across the food system, such as all of you, move toward preventing wasted food and make more sustainable choices about how to manage any remaining food waste. We also conduct and fund research and aim to provide the latest science and data to the public, which helps decision makers and policymakers who are climate planning or developing policies and regulations or evaluating infrastructure needs. So we wear many hats and we are here to help. So please do reach out to us when you need to. Next slide, please. So obviously I'm from the EPA, so I'm going to kick us off here with a little bit of the environmental framing around this issue. Minimizing environmental impacts of food waste is EPA's main driver for doing this work, but we recognize that the benefits of achieving our goals will go well beyond that. As you all know, when we waste food, all the resources that go into producing and processing and transporting, retailing, and preparing that food go to waste. It really bears repeating because it takes such an incredible amount of resources to get food to our plate. And of course, disposal of food waste has its own various impacts as well. Just a few stats I'm going to throw out there. The environmental impact of wasted food in the US is equal to that of more than 50 million gas-powered vehicles or about 60 coal-fired power plants, and requires enough water and energy to supply more than 50 million homes each year. So it is quite significant. And in the past few years, we've worked to really quantify some of those impacts. And we've published a few reports that communicate the full footprint of wasted food from production through disposal, along with updated guidance on the most to least environmentally preferable ways to manage it. Next slide, please. So I want to touch on two of these reports that were released last fall. The first modeled landfill methane emissions associated with food waste, providing the first ever peer-reviewed estimate of how much landfill methane is attributable to food waste. And the second report on the right examined the environmental impacts of managing food waste through 11 common pathways, including landfilling, incineration, composting, anaerobic digestion, and sending food down the drain through the sewer system. Both of these are available on our website, and I will have a bunch of links and QR codes at the end of the presentation. You're obviously welcome to share the slides so people have all of those handy as well. Next slide. So when organic waste, such as wasted food, breaks down in landfills under anaerobic conditions, methane is generated, and some of that methane is emitted directly to the atmosphere. Methane traps 28 times more heat than carbon dioxide over a 100-year period, and about 80 times more over a 20-year period. So reducing methane emissions is of utmost importance in tackling climate change. We undertook this landfill methane study because we wanted to understand really what proportion of the methane coming out of landfills is attributable to food waste. We knew that MSW landfills are the third largest source of methane emissions from human activities in the US, and that food waste comprises about a quarter on average nationally of MSW landfills in this country. But we didn't have that peer-reviewed estimate of what proportion of landfill methane emissions are due to food waste. So the study found that using the year 2020, an estimated 58% of the fugitive methane emissions, those released to the atmosphere from municipal solid waste landfills, were from landfilled food waste. So I just want to pause and underscore this. It's 58%, even though food is estimated to be about 24% of the municipal solid waste in landfills. So it really does have an outsized impact on methane emissions going on at landfills. Next slide, please. So unsurprisingly, we have confirmed that sending food waste to landfills create a big methane problem. That's not a surprise to anybody. So then what, right? So we wanted to also know what the environmental impacts of all the other management options are and provide that information to decision makers. So we began research on the environmental impacts of wasted food in a 2021 report, and that looked at basically farm to kitchen, right? So it didn't include the impacts of managing waste. It was the upstream impacts. And then we continued that analysis by looking at the downstream impacts of 11 common pathways in our October 2023 report called Field to Bin, the Environmental Impacts of U.S. Food Waste Management Pathways. And the intention behind this report was really to take all the available most recent data and look at all of the potential pathways for which we could find enough data to try and either ground truth or update the food recovery hierarchy. You might recall the triangle hierarchy that the EPA had since the 1990s. It hadn't been updated. And so, you know, the environmental impacts have been studied much more since then, especially those related to GHG emissions and climate change, and also just technologies and operational practices have changed in the last few decades as well. So that was the goal behind looking at all of these pathways. The ones that are highlighted in orange, I just highlighted those to show that those were not at all in our previous food recovery hierarchy. So those were some new ones that we wanted to make sure to include. Next slide, please. So hopefully you've all seen EPA's wasted food scale by now. It did come out last fall, and it represents the results of all the work we did to look at the environmental impacts of these different pathways. The wasted food scale ranks wasted food pathways from most to least environmentally preferable from the upper left to the upper right, based on life cycle analysis and a circularity assessment in our Field to Bin report. Just so you know, it is available in 8 languages in both a simple and a detailed version. You can find all the files on our website. Please feel free to use them on your websites, on your materials, and your presentations, however is useful to you. Just a couple notes before I dive into some of the findings that are depicted here. You'll see that some pathways are grouped into tiers, and that is where we determine them to basically have equivalent performance. So we couldn't really rank one above the other when they're in the same tier. Also, it's important to note that the scale is based on the environmental performance of wasted food in these different pathways, and it's not applicable to other types of waste. And the last thing I want to emphasize is that this is solely about environmental impacts, so social and economic factors are not considered in this ranking. So I want to go over 6 broad findings to hopefully explain this in case you've seen it before and haven't spent a lot of time with it, and just talk about kind of some things that are new here compared to our old hierarchy. So source reduction, donation, and upcycling are the most environmentally preferable pathways because they can displace additional food production. But the benefits of all the pathways beyond those three are pretty small relative to the environmental impacts of food production. So they can do little to offset those impacts. And as an example, anaerobic digestion can produce more energy per unit of wasted food than the other energy producing pathways that we looked at here, but AD can still only recover about 20% of the energy that was required to produce each unit of food. So prevention is always going to outperform recycling. Another point I want to make here is about the sewer wastewater treatment pathway, which we call here sending food waste down the drain. It's a little bit more plain English and perhaps understandable. But the sending food waste down the drain and landfilling stand out for their sizable methane emissions. And that's because wasted food decays rapidly in anaerobic conditions. And what we saw when we looked at available data is that sewer transport allows for uncontrolled methane releases. Including this pathway of sending food waste down the drain is definitely new. That pathway was not considered in our hierarchy from the 1990s, but it is a pretty common way for households to manage some wasted food. So we really wanted to take a closer look and understand where that fits into the picture. So the emissions of basically the methane emissions coming from those two pathways far exceed any benefits you might get from energy recovery technologies like AD at a water resource recovery facility or gas capture at landfills. Another thing I want to point out that I think is really relevant to this group and the discussions you're going to have today is that recycling wasted food into soil amendments through composting and AD obviously offers opportunities to make long-term improvements in soil structure and health, and also helps regenerate ecosystems by recovering nitrogen and carbon and returning them to the soil. So one thing we recognize with this wasted food scale is that not all AD is the same. Anaerobic digestion creates nutrient-rich outputs, right? But they aren't always used in a beneficial way. Sometimes those things are just disposed, they're landfilled. So we split up anaerobic digestion based on the data we had, and the AD ranking here is dependent on whether you are beneficially reusing the digestate or biosolids. So you'll see it's ranked equal to compost with beneficial use of those materials or of those products, and it's ranked lower if the digester or biosolids are being disposed. I think that's an important distinction, and I think it also highlights something that people aren't always aware of, which is that those nutrient-rich outputs are often not being used beneficially. And obviously the environmental impacts are much less if they are being used and kept in the system. And then the last thing I just want to note about this whole analysis is that as the US becomes less dependent on fossil fuels for energy, the environmental value of producing energy from food will decrease. So these things can become less productive as we move to a more renewable energy system. Thank you. That was a lot in one slide, and I'm happy to take questions if people have them. But let's move on to the next slide, please. So I've gone over quickly some recent research and some new guidance on on environmentally preferable ways to manage food. Let me just shift gears a little bit and talk about a few key resources that EPA provides that may be useful to you and your work. The first one is our Excess Food Opportunities Map. This is a nationwide tool that depicts potential generators and recipients of excess or wasted food. So this includes things like grocery stores and schools, food manufacturers, and then on the recipient side includes composting and AD facilities, as well as food banks. We also include food access and assistance data from USDA, and we have environmental justice data from EPA's EJ Screen tool. So all of these different data layers can be overlaid. They're all downloadable. And so there's lots of different uses of this map that may be of interest to you. We are also in the process of updating the map and are hopeful that we have the next version out this fall with new data sets for anaerobic digesters, composting facilities, farmers markets, and food banks. And the thing I'm really excited about there is that we're expanding to over 8,000 food banks, food pantries, and soup kitchens. And this is in partnership with USDA and Hunger Free America. So that's, I think, hopefully going to make the map a lot more useful from that perspective. I also want to highlight 2 social marketing toolkits that EPA created. C+C was actually the lead on those, so thank you. I think they're really wonderful products. One assists communities wishing to engage their residents in preventing household wasted food, and the other one is for communities who want to launch a composting campaign to either increase participation or decrease contamination in a municipal composting program. So they also include downloadable sets of customizable campaign assets, and you'll probably recognize some of those from your area if you take a look, that have been generously provided by several municipalities and NRDC. So take a look at that if you are looking to do some social marketing campaigns. Shifting to some of our data work, since 2017, we've been surveying anaerobic digestion facilities that process food waste, and these surveys go to standalone digesters, farms, and water resource recovery facilities that co-digest food waste. So EPA collects information from those facilities about food waste and other feedstocks processed, biogas produced, and general operations. So the 6th and final survey in this series just closed, and our previous survey results are available on our AD web pages going back to 2015. So take a look at that if you're interested in AD data. With regard, or I just want to mention 2 peer networks, which is actually how I'm connected to Kelsey from King County. One of them is the Food Too Good to Waste peer network, which many of you might have heard of, and some of you are probably part of. Is open to anybody. We facilitate it. We have monthly meetings, and we focus on the topic of food waste prevention in households. EPA also runs a compost and anaerobic digestion peer network that's open to state and local government regulators working on either of those topics. You're more than welcome to reach out to me if you'd like to join either of those. And my email address will be on the last slide, and I'll put it in the chat as well. Next slide. I want to briefly touch on funding opportunities. I won't spend too much time on this, but I do want to mention that the amount of funding I'm seeing going out of the federal government in the last few years is really a once-in-a-lifetime situation. And under the bipartisan infrastructure law, EPA was able to establish 2 new grant programs related to materials management. One of them is the Solid Waste Infrastructure for Recycling Program, which we shorthand to SWIFR. And the other one is the Recycling Education and Outreach Program, which we shorthand to RIO. While those are not specific to organics, they are much broader in scope. We did, out of the $198 million that we awarded across those 2 programs in the first round of awards, about $83 million went to projects that addressed organics recycling. Most of that went to composting, which included food waste. So that money went out to communities, states, territories, and tribes. And we are planning to release the next set of funding opportunities for SWIFR and RIO this fall. So please stay tuned. If you don't currently receive our In the Loop newsletter, I would suggest signing up for that, and there will be a link at the end so that you can get all the latest funding opportunity information there. Next slide. So looking forward a little bit, I just want to briefly touch on a few things that may be of interest to you all that are coming up. This summer, EPA, USDA, and FDA jointly released a national strategy for reducing food loss and waste and recycling organics. And that basically lays out actions each agency plans to undertake. Some of them are actually already underway. So I wanted to touch on that briefly. Next slide, please. If you haven't seen our national strategy, it is basically broken down into these objectives here: preventing the loss of food, preventing the waste of food, increasing the recycling rate for all organic waste, and then supporting policies. So we lay out within each of those categories the actions we're going to take. So if you're curious what we're working on, this is definitely the best and most recent place to see kind of a comprehensive plan that we've put out. So I'd encourage you to take a look if you're curious. Next slide. I wanted to briefly highlight, and this is my last substantive slide, but I wanted to briefly highlight some of the items we're working on that we committed to in that national strategy. And this is certainly not an exhaustive list, but just a few things you may be interested to hear are going on. The first is that we committed to fund the development and implementation of a national consumer education and behavior change campaign related to preventing household food waste. This would be a customizable campaign informed by research on effective messaging for behavior change and learnings from all the community level food waste prevention campaigns that are going on out there, where Washington has really been a leader, and several counties in Washington have also been doing this work for a long time. So you all really paved the way, I think, for a future national campaign. Related to household food waste, we're also updating that $1,500 estimate that you all may have heard of how much food waste an average family of four spends on uneaten food per year. So stay tuned for a new estimate there. Another piece of data work that we're doing is updating our national estimates of wasted food generation and management. These are published in our wasted food report series, and hoping to get that out in the next 6 months or so. We're also starting to analyze the results of our final anaerobic digestion data collection project survey, which includes data from 2022 and 2023. And we will have a summary out on our AD web pages when that's done. A couple things I wanted to note that are underway for composting. One thing we're working on is a report on the benefits of compost use, as well as the barriers to compost use. And this excludes ag use, but looks at other uses of compost. And we're also developing an emissions model for composting facilities. This is being done out of our EPA Region 9 and 10 West Coast offices. And it's basically going to be similar to what the landfill gas emissions model, LandGEM, is for landfill facilities and regulators. So really excited about that composting work. So stay tuned for all of that. We're also providing a synthesis of the latest science related to contamination by plastic and PFAS in organics recycling, which will serve as an update to a series of reports we did in 2021 on those topics. We're creating a tool to calculate avoided methane emissions from diverting food waste from landfills. And we're also looking at, we're assessing the methane emissions from food waste sent down the drain and through the sewer system using both field and lab work. So these are all things that are underway at various stages. Again, just stay tuned and we'll announce these things in our various channels when they are ready. And then finally, I want to emphasize again that we are releasing the next round of notices of funding opportunities for our Swiffer and Rio programs this fall. Next slide. That is all I have. I know I had to go through a lot of things quickly. Thanks for your attention. There's a bunch of links on this page. The QR code takes you to our Sustainable Management of Food homepage, from which you can find all of these other pages and information. And that is it. Next slide has a QR code to sign up to receive our monthly newsletter. And my email address is at the bottom, which I'll also put in the chat. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. So we're going to go into our next presenter now. And if you have any questions for Claudia, you can drop them in the chat and she can review them and potentially answer them. Otherwise, you can wait for our Q&A session after our next presentation. And with that, I will pass it off to Kelsey and Eliza from King County to share some of their updates.
Thanks, Sam. I'm going to be starting us off here. Hi, everyone. My name is Eliza Krasinski. I'm one of the organics team project managers at King County. Can go to the next slide. Thanks, Sam. So I'm going to start off with an update of the organics collection in King County. This is minus the city of Seattle. So we estimate that in 2023, King County businesses and residents generated about 488,000 tons of organic waste. And compared to 2022, it's a slight drop, about 14,000 tons less. And that's what the overall tonnage estimate is there. Breaking it out, it's about a 50-50 split of what actually gets sent to compost facilities and what's still ending up in landfill. It's about a similar proportion to 2022 figures. And to get these numbers, we use actual tonnage reports to determine that 231,000 tons of organic waste went to compost facilities. And then the pink figures there are an estimate using our garbage tonnage reports from our haulers and our waste characterization study that gives you that 257,000 tons yet going to landfill. And the waste characterization study that we use is our most recent and was completed last year. Next slide, please. Thanks, Sam. Moving on, we also look beyond just King County at the capacity of the organics processing facilities, in our case, all composters in our region. So those facilities include Cedar Grove, Maple Valley in King County, and then in Snohomish County, Cedar Grove, Everett, and Lens Enterprises. There are smaller facilities in our region, though we don't track those here. That also includes smaller processors such as on-site composting like farmers might. Our current estimate based on the 2023 facility reports that we get from Department of Ecology and Public Health is that these composting facilities servicing not only King, but also Seattle and Snohomish counties are at about 70% of permitted capacity, within a percent of 2022 estimates. Next slide, please. So switching gears, I'd also like to share a little bit about our commercial organics program, which is near and dear to my heart since it's the program that I help run, and it launched this year. So the purpose of this program is making sure businesses are compliant with the requirements of the Organics Management Law, aka the OML, and making sure that they're aware of which ones apply to them. So in 2024, businesses within the business organics management area, which I'll touch on in the next slide, those businesses that produced 8 yards of organic waste a week or more are expected to divert that waste to curbside organic service, to self-haul it, or to compost on site. So we did outreach to over 70 businesses in King County, focusing on unincorporated areas first. And we shared information about the Organics Management Law via email, phone, and site visits. In the latter half of that period, we realized that we were getting more responses and more engagement from businesses when we did drop-in visits rather than scheduled visits or preliminary emails and phone calls. And when this slide was made, we had completed about a dozen on-site visits, but we've had a few more since then as well. We're going to be doing another round of outreach later this year yet, and adapting our strategy with some of those lessons learned so far. So if you're interested in more details on that, please feel free to email me at the email at the bottom of the slide here, organics@kingcounty.gov. And I'd also be happy to share some of the materials we've created with this program. We've created a flyer, a one-pager on the Organics Management Law for businesses, as well as a version for schools. Also on this slide here, I want to briefly call out some updates to the Organics Management Law that was made within this past legislative session that apply to businesses. So part of this law is phased in. The 2024 requirements, as I said earlier, are 8 yards of organic waste per week or more. Next year in 2025, that threshold is 4 yards of organic waste per week. And the requirements for 2026 and onward used to be based on garbage volume, but that was changed to align better with the 2024 and 2025 requirements. And it is now 96 gallons of organic waste. And that's the standard bin size you see pictured here. So we can expect that'll capture a lot more businesses, if not the majority. And we're going to need to do a lot more outreach work to get the word out to everyone. So partnerships and coordination among us solid waste folks will be extra important. Next slide. This is the Business Organics Management Area Map I referred to, or the BOMA map. So these are the geographic areas where the business requirements we talked about apply. They're reevaluated every year in July by the Department of Ecology. So note the new areas in King for us include the cities of Enumclaw, Snoqualmie, Duval, and then the northeast corner of the county, which is part of the Stevens Pass ski area, which is essentially the ski resort and a couple of restaurants. That does not include the town of Skykomish. If you're outside of King, I'll drop a link in the chat shortly to the entire statewide BOMA map for you to check that out. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Kelsey. Thank you for having me so much, and please do reach out with any questions.
Thanks, Eliza. Sam, you can go to the next slide. Just to quickly reintroduce myself, my name is Kelsey Bailey. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm with King County Solid Waste. I'm the Organic Circular Economy Program Manager. I run a little bit of like the bookends of the organics life cycle, from prevention and donation, and then to the other side of organics processing and application. So really on point with that. I'm going to talk a little bit on an update for the compost procurement ordinance implementation. So for folks, for a quick reminder, in the first edition, or 1.0 of the Organics Management Law that passed in 2022, one of the many requirements to kind of address, again, those different points of the life cycle or circular economy of organics, one of those requirements was that jurisdictions that meet a certain criteria must pass a compost procurement ordinance. So the intent for this requirement ensures that the public sector is doing its part in closing the loop for organics. As we collect and process more organics to be made into compost and other products, we then in turn must return those nutrients to our local soils to feed future plant life. So local jurisdictions must report on the tons of organic material diverted, the volume of compost purchased, the cost of all compost purchased, and then the source, or as we kind of described for our internal staff, the vendor from which the compost was purchased. Implementation for local jurisdictions has certainly not been easy and not always having a very clear path. But here at King County, we've worked really diligently to work with colleagues across our different departments and divisions and project teams to identify who's purchasing compost in what capacities, what existing channels already exist for different reporting on sustainability and equity and social justice. So, so far, we've devised a phased strategic plan to capture all channels of county compost purchases. As we're working through that, we are hosting live and then provide recorded trainings in understanding the law more broadly, the compost procurement ordinance, its requirements, what are different uses and applications of compost that the county could be using, how do they do it, what kind of compost do you need, how much, all that fun stuff, which is covered in our one-on-one technical assistance. And we also have some step-by-step guides to walk folks through the reporting process. As I go through these next couple slides, if you have additional questions that we can't get to in the chat, or just want to have a conversation, similar to the other email address, we have a pretty broad one focused on compost. So it's compost@kingcounty.gov. Next slide, Sam, please. So in this strategic plan, phased plan that we've been going on, the first channel we pursued for compost purchases was in our capital projects. This is likely a huge source of spending for most jurisdictions and likely to have the largest portion of compost purchases in the county. So thankfully, our capital projects teams have existing reporting systems for these other environmental and equity and social justice metrics. So I was able to work with contract specialists, capital project managers, green building managers, and other staff to draft boilerplate language for both design and construction contracts for all of our divisions and departments to access and revise to fit according to their project. That highlights those requirements for tracking and reporting compost. This is a screenshot of what our capital projects managers have to fill out upon project completion during the construction phase of a project. So as you see on the far right, left of the screen in the bigger box, it's highlighting the different types of projects or project categories that is emphasized in the ordinance in the OML for where compost could be used. So our capital projects managers and contractors can go into this and slide yes or no on the utilized of, did you have landscaping in this project? Were you trying to prevent soil erosion and the like? Say yes or no. If you say yes, the window drops down, and then we have the extra fields available to get how much compost did you purchase, who did you purchase it from, what product did you purchase. In the case of like a two-way mix or a topsoil blend, that is not always entirely comprised of compost. So if they provide what product they purchase, we are then able to know between the vendor and product what percent of that material was compost. So then we can delineate that in our reporting to ecology, and then also then the total cost of that material. Next slide, Sam. And then I'll jump to another update here in King County. I presented on this last year, and a couple of folks have been familiar with this. You'll see a logo that you saw earlier from Claudia's presentation, Food to Good to Waste. So here at King County, I run our Food to Good to Waste program with the help of C+C and the awesome team over there. It's our food waste prevention program for households. 2 years ago, we realigned our focus for how we spend resources in food waste prevention. Thanks to feedback and continual conversations we have with our RePlus community panel, we formed a great working relationship with the HopeLink food markets that have food markets spread around King County. We have been working together in how we can utilize and further develop materials and resources to help households lengthen the life of their food and their dollar with tools like our food storage guides, containers, eat now stickers where you can put it in your fridge, and if food is close to expiration or leftovers, you have a designated area in your fridge and a visual cue for yourself and for your families to kind of eat those foods first. And then we have a couple of other various materials. Some of the photos on the screen feature some of our visits at some of the food markets this year. You'll see on the top left behind our lovely staff here and folks from the food bank. Our food storage guide has been blown up. We have it in 7 to 8 different languages. Kind of call it our food storage map. It's very visual, very user-friendly in figuring out where different materials will live the longest and last the longest at home. And the zoom ins, a couple of those items are more towards the front of the screen, and a couple of our language options to show the variety and the work that went into making these storage guides more culturally relevant depending on the community that would use it. And yeah, we'd like to thank HopeLink for this partnership. We're continuing to do this work, and we're thrilled to keep bettering and serving our communities. So I think that's it for me. Sam, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you, Eliza. So yeah, we have our Q&A now. I see some folks have already started asking questions, and our speakers have started answering. If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and I can read them out loud, or raise your hand and I can call on you. You can ask Claudia, Eliza, or Kelsey any questions you have. And I'm going to stop sharing screen here so I can see your hands if you have them up. Roma G.
Good morning. Thank you. Kelsey, I was wondering, you showed some great resources for like reducing food waste in individuals' homes, stickers, and those kinds of things. And I work in tribal communities, primarily in Southern King County with Muckleshoot. And we're always having these conversations like RePlus, different committees that I sit on. How do we help folks reduce their individual waste in their homes, have these conversations, or maybe host workshops? Know if you guys come out, if there's virtual workshops that can be hosted to like how to utilize these tools, how to reduce our personal waste, kind of centered around our food values, you know?
Yeah, thanks so much, Jean. That is something we can certainly do. If there is a in-person or virtual event that you think would be best suited for the folks who are interested in this, we can make either happen. I think it's really great to also talk about this, which we've learned in the partnership with the Hope Link markets, is that yes, like these are addressing, or the original intent for this program is to reduce food waste, but really focusing on what is your value of keeping and lengthening life of food. A lot of different folks and households have value set on using all of a food item. So like getting creative with, I don't know, I'm thinking of celery right now. Like using the green tops for that in a pesto or other type of dish to kind of utilize all of the plant that is edible and uphold a belief of not having waste. For folks and other organizations that would like to have some type of workshop or webinar or have a conversation of how you can kind of continue this work in your organization, reach out to the organics or compost email at King County and get that sorted. Thanks, Jean.
A question from Ryan. How is King County doing in buying Cedar Grove compost?
Ryan, can I have you elaborate a little more on what you mean by how we're doing in buying Cedar Grove compost?
Yeah, no, I just was wondering how much you guys are you buying it and using it at your parks and other facilities that King County operates?
Yeah, so prior to my hire here at King County, we have a universal compost contract. We had put out to bid, Cedar Grove was awarded that contract. In that we have a direct contract for our internal staff to reference a certain contract number. So that also helps in us tracking which purchases that go through Cedar Grove are part of King County specifically. It's a pretty simple process. They can call in or email into their ordering service, reference this contract number, and get a special value price on that material. Our contractors are not able to purchase through the contract with Cedar Grove, and so their King County representative would have to do that. If not, we already get more regular reports from Cedar Grove on how purchases are coming through. But if there's more questions, Ryan, on that, I can add to that.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions for Claudia, Eliza? From Tony, language barrier is one of the main barriers that our community faces. Kelsey, is there also PI language included in those translations?
Thanks, Tony. That is something that we are looking to do in the next year or so. After meeting with you and the folks at our different community feedback sessions, that is something that we're hoping to do. So I'll be in touch. We're trying to expand our languages on those.
Al said, I've reached out to local compost vendors to request compost percentages in their blends to inform our capital and parks departments. I have not been able to get rough numbers. Are these numbers you already have access to when calculating compost used in King County projects?
Given that the first round, and Jay, thank you for adding that as well. You can reach out to Cedar Grove for their different product percentages for compost. We at King County don't have our exact list for all the different vendors in the area at this time. The first report to the Department of Ecology isn't due until the end of March. So we haven't closed out yet the compost purchases for projects completed within 2024. So once we see what products folks are using, we were going to go back and send that list out.
Jay also mentioned that King County is Cedar Grove's largest local government customer. Any additional questions for any of our speakers this morning? All right. Well, if there are no additional questions, or if something comes up later, you can feel free to stay on and ask Kelsey and Eliza in one of our networking sessions later, or email Claudia directly if you have anything. I believe she put her contact information in the chat, and we'll also send it out after as well. In the meantime, I think we have time for a little break. And yeah, for everyone to take a little bio break, and we can all return back at 10:01. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone. Hopefully everyone's back at their desks, and we can continue with part 2. Part 2 of the summit. First up on our list is Tyler from Blue Glass Farm. Tyler, are you there? I think there's a little issue with your audio, Tyler. You're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Now.
Yes, a little bit soft, but we can hear you.
Now, is that better?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Okay. Let me get queued up here. So, thank you everyone for coming. So my name is Tyler Morgan. I run Blue Glass Farm along with my farm partner Alex, and this is a talk I'm calling My Complicated Relationship with Compost. So running a farm has taught us many things, but above all, one of those stands out, and that is our deep reliance on and sometimes frustration with compost. You go to the next slide, please. So over the past 3 years, we've shoveled and hauled 150 yards of compost. That's about 75 tons. And we didn't use tractors, machines, just us, shovels, and wheelbarrows. It's 20,000 shovelfuls. Each one moved with muscle and sweat. We didn't just dump it and walk away. We pushed those wheelbarrows mile after mile. That's 30 miles in total. It's 150,000 feet of pushing, roughly 3 times the cruising altitude of a 787. But we didn't stop there. After we got all of that in, we also then proceeded to transplant 60,000 individual plants in that compost by hand. So we have this really, really intimate relationship with compost. We've felt the weight of every decision we make, not just on our backs and shoulders, but in the outcomes we see in the field. We see compost in ways that few others do because we've lived it, breathed it, and carried it literally every step of the way. Next slide, please. But this isn't all about compost. We are a farm after all, and we move this compost to grow delicious food. And you know what food makes food delicious is sugar and micronutrients. But you know what else likes sugar and micronutrients? Well, rodents, fungus, and bacteria. And these are the enemies of food purveyors everywhere. We've been talking about food spoilage. And the solution to these problems in sort of cultivation practices is that we try to breed crops that have as little nutrition as possible, and then we try to transport them at a period where they're as absolutely solid as possible. And that's why your grocery store tomato has more in common with a hockey puck than it does with Wolfgang puck. We've bred all of this out of them. And so you might be wondering, well, how do local farms actually grow delicious produce without worrying about it being eaten by rodents or rotting in transit? And the simple answer is we don't give it a chance to. It's all about time. So our solution is to next slide, sorry. Our solution is to be as close to our customers as possible. We sell to them directly. Our farm is in the north end of the Sammamish Valley on land we lease from Viva Farms. We're a 20-minute walk from Woodinville City Hall. We're about 12.5 miles from the Space Needle. Almost every bit of our produce has a final destination within 20 miles from the farm. So this is a map of all of the different restaurants that we sell to directly or through farm stand local foods. There's also some food access organizations in here as well. So this basically ranges from our farm down to South Seattle. And the time it takes us to get produce from our fields to the final customer is often less than 18 hours. Very seldom has produce even shown up in the grocery store that fast, much less made it to the final consumer when it's coming through a conventional agriculture system. People are always amazed. I just pulled this out. This is an onion that I had sitting on my counter that has been sitting since last July. This is now 14 months old, and it is still hard as a rock, perfectly good. And that's because so often the produce that consumers are getting has been sitting in warehouse and transit for 3/4 of its lifespan. So that is a huge cause of waste. And so now, where does all this produce go? And this may come as a shock to people, but our goal as a farm is to make a living. And how does one make a living as a farmer? Well, we grow produce and sell it for as much money as we can get. So everything we grow is perfect, everything goes according to plan, and we get absolutely as much money as possible. But nothing goes like that. We think of the way we move produce through our farm as a tiered system. So some folks have sort of alluded to this earlier. Ideally, we sell as much of our produce as we can for the highest dollar. So this is channels like the farmer's market, our online store. It goes to amazing restaurants and local retailers. And that is where a lot of our produce goes. Not all of it, but where a lot of it. But the real stuff that causes issues is, sorry, thank you for progressing the slides. The real thing that causes issue is like real seconds. This isn't like the yellow-bellied cucumbers and stuff that are purely aesthetic. These are crops that either have some kind of a damage or structural anomaly that will cause them to spoil incredibly quickly. They could not make it through a long food chain. They're going to spoil in 3 or 4 days once we pull them out of the ground. And this is where we start to get creative. This is where we start working with local food access organizations and some really creative chefs. They're willing to take this produce and work with it on a really tight time frame. They have 2 or 3 days maybe to really get the best use out of this. So some of our produce goes through that. And then anything we can't sell through one of those 2 channels, we donate. So this goes to food banks like the Woodinville Storehouse. Some of it goes to Farms for Life, even though they buy some of our produce. And we also eat a lot of it ourselves and we give it to friends. But yes, some produce does slip through the cracks. Some of it we can't make it to the food bank in time. It's hard to tell exactly when produce is going to rot often. And sometimes we just forget. Farming is really busy. And then anything that doesn't get consumed by a human gets turned into compost on site. So ideally, it does get sold, but we do make really great compost. So next slide, please. Now, as I mentioned, we operate, oh, sorry. Next slide again. There we go. As I mentioned, we operate on an incredibly small footprint. And because of that, we have adopted a method of farming known as market gardening. Broadly, this means we grow diversified fruit and vegetables intensively using human scale tools. So we don't use big ride-along tractors. Most farms use 2-wheel walk-behind tractors, but we don't even do that. We've taken this to the extreme by growing over 250 varieties of 90 different food and cut flower crops on less than half an acre. For my Seahawks fans out there, that's about half the size of a standard American football field. And for my fellow nerds, that's the size of about 340,000 Pokemon cards. Next slide, please. So our crops include gorgeous heirloom tomatoes and tropical anomalies like Malabar spinach. And by selling those, we are on track to generate over $30,000 in revenue this year on half an acre, which is the equivalent of about $70,000 per acre. To put this in context of conventional farming, hay and wheat produce about $500 to $2,000 per acre, and we're producing $70,000. Premium tree fruit produce about $10,000 per acre. So we're not just some eco warriors out here screaming for the trees. This type of farming has real economic teeth. And we believe that nothing can be environmentally sustainable over a very long period if it isn't also economically sustainable. Next slide, please. Another thing they mentioned here is, I said we don't use a tractor, but we do this without any piece of equipment larger than a Ryobi lawnmower, this exact Ryobi lawnmower. So if you go to the next slide, where we really differ from typical gardens is they typically rely on tillage. We use a no-till method known as deep mulching, and I find that the best way to explain deep mulching is to start with the basics. The next slide, please. So this might seem really obvious, but we'll come back to this later. Farmers grow crops by putting seeds or young plants into a growing medium. And for most farmers, this growing medium is soil. And this is what soil looks like if you just uncover it and let it do its thing. These are all weeds. These are weeds that compete with the crops in the soil. They compete for things they need like light, water, and nutrients. So we need a way to kill those seeds, which is why farms rely on herbicides. Luckily, smart people realized decades ago that chemical herbicides were analogous. And this is why organic problems disallow them and why we don't use them. We don't use any, even under organic standards, we don't use any herbicides, fungicides, or pesticides. And so this is now, next slide, please, why most farms rely on tillage to smash young weeds and provide a weed-free seedbed. It actually works really well for creating a really nice weeds. But this has the unintended consequence of causing physical and chemical soil erosion that can lead to catastrophic nutrient depletion for decades. We are literally ruining the very land that grows our food by flushing nutrients into rivers and off-gassing them in the atmosphere, along with massive amounts of CO2. There's some staggering numbers on the amount of CO2 that has been released from America's agricultural zones over the last few hundred years. Next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier that weeds need things like light, heat, and water. So the next idea is, well, what if we just denied them those things? And that's where mulching comes in. And so traditionally, mulches would be an organic material, like hay, or straw, or wood chips, or leaf mold. And we put these on the surface of our beds to deny weeds the things they need, and then transplant plants into those so the plants can still get what they need. So the problem with these types of mulches, they often contain weed seeds. They can carry diseases. They can be really difficult to plant through. Things like hay are notoriously problematic for mechanical transplanting, and they aren't always available. A lot of these things are sort of hard to find. So next slide, please. And this is why increasingly organic farms have done exactly what you would expect an organic farm to do. They wrap their beds in one-time use plastic like a gas station burrito, which definitely does not cause downstream waste problems or lead to increased water runoff or put a bunch of microplastics and macroplastics in your field for the next 1,000 years. It totally does all of those things. It is also an incredibly wasteful but entirely certifiably organic way of farming. And this is the way most of your organic produce these days is grown. So next slide, please. So you might be wondering, is there no solution? Well, take a step back. Those organic mulches seemed like they were pretty good. They just had the disease problems and sort of the weed seed problems. So what if there was an organic material that made an amazing mulch, but didn't have those weed and disease problems, and also was really easy to plant into, just like soil? And so next slide, please. You probably all guessed this. That material is compost. So compost is a pretty darn good growing medium. We have been told by composters you can't grow directly in it, but that is factually wrong. We've been doing it for 3 years. You can post directly into it. It has a great NPK. It has great tilth. It's only mildly alkaline. You can put compost in a pot, plant directly into it, and it will grow. Most compost, it won't be happy, but it can totally make it through its life cycle. So the key here is to start the plant in the compost, but still it has close enough access to the underlying topsoil that it can get the rest of the nutrients it needs that aren't available in the compost. So next slide, please. So this is what deep mulch is. And this is why we use so much compost on our farm, and it works pretty well. It suppresses weeds, provides nutrition and soil carbon, and prevents erosion. And so this picture is especially important because we don't till, our ground is very stable. So this is what our field looked like before we put in our deep mulch beds. In the Sammamish Valley, our water table is often 2 inches above ground level for probably 4 or 5 months of the year. We have neighbors who can't get a tractor into their field until August. Really, really wet part of the area. But we don't need to worry about that. We can farm year round. As soon as it's warm in the spring, we can plant. And as long as it doesn't rain so hard that our plants drown in the winter, we can winter crop as well. So next slide, please. And so why isn't everyone doing this? It sounds like it fixes so many problems. Well, the first thing is it's a relatively recent technology. As folks in this room probably know, modern composting, the way we do it now in like windrow composted systems with blended aerated systems, has only been around for like 100 years. It's still pretty recent. Deep mulching has really only been much on the public scene for 20 or 30 years. So it's relatively new. And there's a learning curve. Hypothetically, you could run into problems like putting so much compost that your plants can't reach the underlying topsoil, or so little compost that buttercup and reed canary grass punch through. Or hypothetically, you could do things like figure out that your irrigation system doesn't work because your initial application of compost is too hydrophobic and drip irrigation won't go through it. So there are these sort of things you gotta figure out hypothetically. Hypothetically, we definitely haven't done any of those things. You can accidentally air prune roots. You can run into compost that's still too hot and try to plant into that, and it will actually scorch roots and cause them to not be able to uptake nutrition. Also, not all compost is created equal. We talk about compost as a homogeneous product, and largely here it's talking sort of about food waste, it sounds like. But traditionally, in agriculture, a lot of it was manure-based. So you've got manure-based, you've got forestry-based compost, you've got post-consumer waste, and it's all of different ages, and they all have different implications in agricultural contexts. And luckily here in the Pacific Northwest, we have availability of really high-quality compost. And that isn't the case in a lot of the country, and that is thanks to a lot of the people in this room who have run great companies and made great policy. So next slide, please. So you might be wondering where all of our compost comes. Cedar Grove is just down the road, so surely it's from Cedar Grove. And this is where things really get complicated. Next slide, please. We get our compost from Lens Enterprises up in Stanwood. And now, this is for a single reason. It contains less visible plastic. Now, I love everything about Cedar Grove compost. I love the tilth. I love the nutrition profile. I love the smell of it. It feels great. And I especially love the idea of using consumer waste from my neighbors in our farm. I love everything except the amount of plastic that's in it. And now this isn't to throw shade on Cedar Grove. And yes, this is the organic compost. We operate on certified organic land. We use only organic compost from both Lens, and it's what we compared against at Cedar Grove. And I said we use Lens because it has less compost, and it is the organic compost. But if you go to the next slide, this is all of the plastic that we found in a single wheelbarrow of compost. And now, again, I don't blame Cedar Grove for this, but I don't want any of this plastic in my salad mix or my carrots or my leeks. The key here is we have given composters the impossible task of taking the random stuff that we throw into compost bins and turn it into an agricultural product. And consumers throw away all kinds of things. I've heard all kinds of horror stories about the things that show up at a compost bin. But ultimately, this is going out as food, so we're really concerned about the amount of plastic that we see. And greenwashing is becoming more and more of a big thing. Even in farm products, I constantly see single-time use plastic products that are marketed to farmers as being sustainable and compostable, and then they're made of PVC and HDPE and all these very much so non-compostable plastics. So next slide, please. So ultimately, we work with what we have access to. And unfortunately, the best option for us for growing the safest food and healthiest food possible isn't anything that uses post-consumer waste. And it's just because of the feedstocks that are coming into consumers or into composters, sorry. which is what led us down the path of making our on-site compost. So in 2022, we built a simple three-bay pallet compost system, which was enough to handle some of the compostable materials on the farm. And we could use the system to generate about 4 yards of compost per year. Next slide, please. But we apply about 30 yards of compost per year, which meant we needed a bigger system. And now we have one thanks to a generous grant from the Washington State Organic and Sustainable Farm Fund, or as I like to call them, the WSSFF. Next slide, please. Because we have such a small footprint and we don't use a tractor, it would have been hard for us to use a traditional windrow compost system where we turn the piles. So we envisioned using a static aerated compost system where we essentially set up a series of pipes under a compost pile to blow air into that pile to keep it aerated instead of turning it. And the only problem was our property doesn't have access to the power grid. So the grant helped us procure a 1.5 kilowatt solar array along with 5 kilowatts of battery power that we could use to power a statically aerated compost system based on a bounce house blower. And it's great. It has been a huge step towards solving our compost needs. But now we can't produce nearly enough compostable materials on site to meet our mulching needs. So the plan is to expand our operation to bring in off-farm material, which is what we're currently trying to navigate. And maybe some of the folks in here can help us navigate that system. And so one of the first things we look towards are landscape wastes. But the real problem with landscaping waste is a lot of landscapers love using herbicides, pesticides, and fungicides. So there's real worry about those contaminations in our crops. They will kill our crops and they're unhealthy for our customers. And you would also be amazed how much plastic shows up in things like leaf cuttings. And these are things taken from people's yards and from the side of the road. Next slide, please. And so some of the best compost is made from animal manure. And the big worry there amongst farms is what is known as persistent herbicides. So essentially, these are herbicides that will make it through, they will be ingested by an animal through feed. And then they will actually make it through to the manure and they can remain viable for years. And in very small quantities, they will kill every other crop other than grasses. And so that is literally everything other than corn for a farm like us. So we really need to make sure that we're getting safe manures, that we're getting safe leaves. So we're looking for sources that can provide us with those in the quantities we need. And we are just beginning the search. We've been looking at the King County manure match. I've been having some conversations with some people that run horses, but it is a bit hard to chase down some of these supply chains. It's a big metro and we are a small farm after all. So next slide, please. So I'm sure that felt like just a flood of information. I've shared a lot today about the challenges and solutions we're navigating at Blue Glass Farm. And hopefully some of this was useful to someone out there. We love our local compost. The only thing stopping us from using more of it is a lack of access to more land in the Sammamish Valley. I would be able to use, 300 yards of compost a year if we had 10 times the acreage. So to succeed, we need support from our community, people who care about where their food comes from, and who are willing to support sustainable local farming, like the people in this room. So thank you for coming out and doing what you do. If you want to learn more about what we do, you can follow us on social media. We're Blue Glass Farm and The Blue Glass Farm on most platforms. Reach out with your questions, or better yet, come out to the farm, buy some produce from us, and actually see the food that's made in the compost that some of the folks in this room make. So if you go to the next slide, you can scan this QR code and that will take you directly to our website. There's a contact form on there. It'll tell you more about the farm. And so with that, I am Tyler Morgan, and I do indeed have a complicated relationship with compost, but it's a relationship that's helping us grow something truly special.
Thank you so much, Tyler. If anyone has questions for Tyler immediately, feel free to just drop it in the chat. I'm sure he can answer them or save it for our Q&A in a bit. Until then, I'm gonna pass over to Jade Monroe from Ecology. Hi, Jade.
Hello, thank you for having me. It's great to see many familiar names in the audience. Hello, and great to meet you if we haven't had a chance to meet yet. My name is Jade Monroe. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm coming at you today from the Food Center here at Ecology. On the backs of tons of work that the team has done. We've expanded quite a bit over the last few years. So I'll just begin with a major shout out to the Food Center and Organics team at Ecology for helping make a lot of this work successful. Oh, and I'm going to start a timer And before I get cooking here, I want to maybe engage the chat a little bit. If folks want to just reinvigorate the chat and share a little bit on maybe some food waste behavior that you admittedly, time to be vulnerable, you might have at home. For me, it's spinach. I can never, it seems I'm either under ordering or buying too big of a container. And I would love to hear some food waste behaviors in the chat before we get going. And we can try to flip into some solutions after we have enough sharing out. So start to think, feel free to just populate the chat while I'm talking. And if you don't mind going to the next slide, please. Ripe banana is real. Thank you, Tyler. Bananas are usually going into my freezer for banana ice cream. Cilantro is definitely a big one. Lettuce, greens are the tricky thing for me as well. And then Brenna is going into solutions already. If you see something in the chat, reply to it and go, have you tried this? And it's a safe space. Maybe we have some solutions generating here with all these brilliant folks. I do feel like in a lot of ways, this is the choir to preach to today, but I want to make sure that you're up to speed on all things food waste here in Washington State. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide because I feel like Claudia and everyone else really did a great job highlighting the issue, but I will put a pin in it by saying, I think at this point, especially of today's presentation, which thank you again, King County, for having me today. I don't think I shared that earlier. We understand it's a global, national, statewide, and local issue, and food waste need not occur in the first place. When we look at food, it is literally the cornerstone of our cultures. And so I really find joy in this work because it seems like it's incredibly meaningful as a material, and especially when we consider that triple bottom line framework of the economic, social, and of course the environmental components of food. So next slide, please. I do want to level set a little bit on what food waste looks like here in Washington. So this is our baseline data, 2015. Washington food waste reduction goals are applied to the data to see what we need to do to get there. And I'm going to be real with y'all. It is a leap and a bound, and it's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take all of us working together and finding those innovative solutions. I'm convinced that if this was truly simple and just a challenge of us needing to talk to each other, it would have solved for itself in the first place. This is a complex issue, no bones about it, and you see it in the data. So we generate over 1.2 million tons of food waste annually. That includes edible and inedible food, and it also includes recovery. And that's by design to make sure that we work towards preventing food waste from happening, as well as managing it at its end of life. And so if you go to the right side, you'll see what it takes to get into the smaller goals. But I do want to highlight, ideally, we have no edible food going to the landfill. And so, yeah, we want to meet that 2030 goal, but ideally that 400 to 500,000 tons of edible food doesn't happen in the landfill at all, and it can go to people that can use it well. Next slide, please. So here's where we're at as far as the best available data to getting to these goals. You'll see we have quite a bit of road left in our journey, but at the same time, if we were to follow that trend line to what 2030 looks like, it doesn't look impossible. So I'll keep scooting and say next slide for now for the sake of time. But the big element I want to share with you is that for these strategies, in order to get to those 2030 goals, we need to leverage all of them, because at the end of the day, yes, prevention's number one and important, but also rescuing food and addressing our hunger need in Washington, you could almost say there's an equivalence in that. And a lot of times, if we're measuring opportunities to reduce food waste, we're also creating quality donation streams in the process, especially if we're looking at large scale generators of surplus food. And so just real quick to make sure we're all on the same page, we have 3 strategies as a state to reduce food waste and to prevent it from happening to begin with. First is prevention, preventing it from happening. Rescuing edible food, going to people that could use it. And this is incredibly important as we look at the hunger need in Washington. We are seeing that over 2 million Washingtonians on a given day could be considered food insecure. And if you really slice that out to our population, 1 in 4 Washingtonians. And so the chances are, as you engage in your day-to-day lives, you're seeing people experiencing food insecurity and engaging with their hunger relief system. And again, when we consider that 500,000 tons of edible food going into the landfill, there's a perfect opportunity here to help support our fellow Washingtonians. And so we are focusing on that in the food center, and I'll get into that in a second. But just to round this out, we have recovery. And so once we've done our best to prevent food waste from happening, to rescue food, To those who could use it, we want to make sure we manage that important nutrient and energy cycle. And so that falls under the definition of recovery, and already a lot of great conversation today on that. So I won't spend too much time there and say next slide. Real quick, and this reminds me to put some links in the chat. Sorry, they're all bundled together, but I just wanted to make sure you got everything. And I'm also seeing some amazing discussion in the chat, so definitely keep it going. I won't engage with it too much as I continue to talk, but I love the synergy that's happening. But if you also want to take a look, I have some links just to highlight, including the Use Food While Washington plan. This is our state's plan to reduce food waste by 50% by 2030. And you'll see it includes a host of recommendations, 30 total. This was achieved with a very large subject matter expert work group, 5 agency partners. And I'm gonna be real with you, the pandemic and this planning process were almost, the Venn diagram was a circle on this. And so it was an amazing opportunity to show a lot of the existing issues and vulnerabilities in our food system through the amplification of the pandemic response. So definitely check it out if you haven't read it already. I'm coming at you from the Food Center. Next slide, please. Which was recommendation 5 in the Use Food While Washington plan. And so you can find, I think I put the Food Center link in the chat. If not, I'll make sure it gets in there, but you can find these strategic priorities on the Food Center webpage. This comes to you from a bunch of planning that my team and I have gone through to make sure that not only are your voices heard, but we're making sure that the Use Food While Washington plan is moved into action. And so what we have here are 5 focus areas, including advancing equity, increasing language access whenever we can, increasing co-creation of materials whenever we can, building partnerships, and this is major. This is everything we're doing today. This is Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment, which we're super happy to work with King County, Seattle Public Utilities as our Washington representatives, where we're regionally working to reduce food waste by 50% by 2030. There's a link to our case studies in the chat that I just put in there. And if you're curious on tangible intervention projects for food waste reduction, definitely check out those case studies. I think they are some of the more landmark studies when it comes to applied food waste reduction in the United States. And I got to be real with you, it took a lot of work to get there. And so definitely take a look and see how you could apply those into your day-to-day. And then, of course, we have improving data and driving research. I think these go hand in hand. While many of us have been working on food waste and addressing food waste, perhaps even for longer than I've had a career, many people in this room, I understand that there's a lot that we've studied, but there's always more that we could better understand, especially as we try to break through the challenges of funding, infrastructure, and connections to build partnerships. The surplus food is out there, and I think it is our task of our lifetime to try to connect those dots in a way that's meaningful and helpful for all the food system in Washington. And so we are working on building the Food Data Hub, a mapping system, in addition to increasing data to better understand food rescue opportunities and access to that surplus food. And then in addition to all of that work, we have been so darn focused in working with many of you in this room on inspiring learning and action and just raising awareness on the issue. And so I think for the rest of my presentation today, I'll spend time on the campaign and how we've been working on raising this awareness and driving that behavior change. But if you have any questions about the rest of what I've just highlighted, I'm glad to answer questions in the Q&A portion of today. So let's scoot along, and next slide, please. Oh, but before I forget, here's our timeline for the Food Center. So really important timeline, and I will put in the chat a link to our peer network. I think I forgot it in my links, or Olivia, one of my amazing team members, if you don't mind throwing that in the chat. We are just starting a peer network now that we've been able to launch the Food Center this year. And I want to just thank everyone in this room who helped engage with that Food Center launch. In preparation to that, we wanted to make sure that we got your voices and we are doing what you want to see the Food Center do. And so everything you see us endeavor is really thanks to your feedback and collaboration. And so thank you if you engaged in that. And if you haven't, you have opportunity to join us later this year for a year in review. But for now, we are focused on building out our Food Waste Prevention Week coordination. Of course, the research I just highlighted, and building out work groups. And so we have 2 key work groups. I have a frog in my throat. I'm going to stop the roll here and take a good sip. Thank you. I think I got it, but sorry in advance if I had to do that a couple of times. It always happens when I'm public speaking. But we had an amazing go for Food Waste Prevention Week this year. And I'll have a few slides later on to show you some of the cool partnerships. And shout out to King County, shout out to Seattle for really bringing their A game and building out those partnerships locally. But we want to pivot now and focus in on those work groups and research. That really means that we're focusing in on food donation and food rescue through the food donation work group and our peer network. And thank you so much, Olivia, for putting that in the chat. It's perfectly timed. We are trying to bring people together to engage in a best practice share and community building, very similar to what Claudia has hosted at the federal level. But we want to really drill into opportunities to connect at the Washington state level. So make sure to register for that. And again, shout out to my team for helping make all this coordination possible. And then finally, we will be having an end of the year feedback and review session at the Food Center. And so I won't spend too much time on that, but be on the lookout on our Use Food Well emails and make sure to subscribe to those to learn more on the year in review. I believe it's in October and we'll be getting more info on that shortly. Next slide, please. All right, audio challenge. And so I would love to share with you the advertisement that we came up with for the Use Food Well campaign to kind of kick off our discussion on that. Sam, if you want to take it away, let's give it a shot to see if it can work. And this happens to me sometimes where I don't click the share audio button on the presentation.
Is it not playing?
I don't hear the audio, unfortunately. I don't know if the rest of the folks can hear it, but I can't.
Try that again.
No sound.
No sound, yeah. And no worries, Sam. I'll just kind of yap while you figure it out because I know this can kind of take a second. But what we really were trying to go for, and some fun feedback I've gotten since we launched the campaign, was approachable, friendly, but still meaningful to folks. And someone told me this mirrors the very hungry caterpillar meets a PSA. And I thought that was a sweet remark. So looks like we can give it a try. So I'll stop talking.
The average family throws out $1,500 of food every year. That's a lot. Imagine what you could do with extra cash. There are simple ways to reduce your food waste and increase your savings. It starts with a plan and ends with a little creativity, like turning your unused food into something new. Get tips to reduce food waste and make your dollar go further. Know the cost. Use food well. Visit the website to learn how.
Yay, thank you, Sam. I appreciate
The average
thank you. And here's the webpage. And so the next kind of few slides, I might breeze a little too fast for you. I get it, and I'm so sorry in advance. And so I really recommend checking out the resources when you have the time. That's usefoodwell.org. We also have the materials available in the Spanish language, and we are working on increasing that accessibility across 3 additional languages with our environmental justice and diversity and equity team. And so stay tuned for those. But for now, you can actually, if you don't mind going to the next slide, please. But for now, you can access resources out of the Ecology's website that include prevention strategies, rescue, and you'll see composting here and managing residuals once you've done your best to prevent food waste and rescue edible food. And you'll notice that there's a theme on the economic message, and that's informed by research, and it's by design. And we found that overwhelmingly folks responded to the economic message of addressing their food waste at home, to the point about 80 to 90% of our population found that significant. Whereas the climate and the social message danced somewhere around 20 to 30% motivating, which was very low in comparison. So we stuck to an economic message here, and you'll see that food waste, actually, next slide, please. Food waste adds up, and we got to know the cost. And I know the EPA is working on updating this figure. We're anticipating for it to nearly double into $2,500 to address food waste every year for the average family, which is super significant as we consider the economic impacts of groceries in this day and age. And so we launched these ads, and they are available on our resources page. Actually, if you don't mind scooting backwards, Sam, I'm sorry. Thank you. There's a resource page right below that food donation link. If you were to click that, you'll not only see our campaign resources, but we reached out to all the local governments and organizations that have existing materials, and we tried to consolidate them to the best of our ability. If you want your resources featured on that page, there's a link to request that. definitely reach out to us. We want to include it. And so check out the resources for ads and the all the features that you're seeing here today, plus more. You can skip ahead to 2 slides now. Thank you so much. And so for the remainder of my time, I want to highlight a really cool partnership that we have going on with Safeway and Albertsons. We partnered with many of you on a number of our Food Waste Prevention Week activities, but Safeway and Albertsons is a super unique partnership as they've worked with us to integrate food waste reduction, communication, and education into the store shopping experience. So you'll see here, eyeing potatoes, store spuds out of sunlight to help them last longer, a link to our campaign webpage. This is featured in over 180 stores, and they have an amazing partner to work with. They've shared our information out on ads and additional partnerships that they have with local media. So we cannot understate the significance and the how much Safeway and Albertsons are coming to the table on this important initiative. Next slide, please. So here are some more examples of what the Safeway Albertsons partnership looks like. And I'm super excited to share that we're exploring research on how to improve and increase the effectivity of this messaging with the World Resources Institute, the United Nations Environmental Program, and then of course our Environmental Protection Agency here in the United States. And so please stay tuned. We're really working on being able to tell this story and to further dive into the research in a way that is meaningful. Next slide, please. Now on to Food Waste Prevention Week. And so maybe by a show of hands, who in the room today participated in Food Waste Prevention Week? I would love to see what that spread looks like today. I have a sneaking suspicion many of you. I'm seeing some heart reacts, seeing a couple hands. You've stepped away from the computer. Oh, I'm seeing just heart reacts on this. That's cool. Let's just heart react. It's making like a little dance on my computer. Cool, I'm seeing some hands. I'm seeing a lot of heart reacts. That's really cool to see. I know many of you put your best foot forward, and we were, as far as states go and healthy competition, we had the most partners out of any state in the nation, and I hope we can continue to maintain that into Food Waste Prevention Week 2025. You'll see in the links I shared, we have a nice summary document with that this information is coming from. I really want to just give shout outs to everyone that helped make this a reality. I'll go ahead and repost that in the chat so you can follow along. There's some amazing, actually, if you want to go to next slide, please. There's some amazing outcomes from our partnership. And this is all super helpful when it comes to being able to just build our Washington strong network when it comes to food waste reduction. So we had 116 participants, including 107 organizations. Shout out to all the local governments and local leaders that got the proclamations signed by their local leaders. We had 8 of those this year, more than we had last year. And you'll see we had a nice diverse representation of organizations when it came to Food Waste Prevention Week partnership. Next slide, please. So when we look across all 23 counties that made Food Waste Prevention Week a reality, we shared an amazing amount of awareness. And we had a record number of in-person events. And so we had 13 workshops and events. Event attendees went over 3,000. We rescued over 60,000 pounds of food in that week alone. So that's just the April, that 1 week in April. And so when we look at the impacts of this community building beyond that, I'm sure you can't truly just multiply that by 52 weeks in a year. But the impacts of this network building and cooperation really are not to be understated. The volunteer hours are also significant, and all the stories we got were just super heartwarming from everyone that engaged this year. Next slide, please. And then to round out the Food Waste Prevention Week highlights, our social campaigns are really the cornerstone and North Star to what we saw to be successful. So not only did we launch our Use Food Well campaign during Food Waste Prevention Week, but we had a number of coordinated efforts to get the message out. And awareness is number one for sure. Many people, I mean, I know we're thinking about it in this room, but let's face it, when we go out to the day-to-day and the competing priorities of what it means to live in our society, this might not be top of mind. So when we look at these numbers of impressions and raising the issue, I like the quote at the bottom a lot, and maybe this is how I'll round out today's presentation. After seeing the Use Food Well on Instagram, I was inspired to be mindful about food waste and start recycling food scraps with the city rather than putting them in the garbage. And has been eye-opening to see the reduction even in our household of 2. It's gratifying to know that we can make a difference even with small changes. And that's what this is all about. I'm rushing because I'm running out of time, but if we were to sit and just with that like email came into our desks and we were just like, wow, it's actually happening. We're making a meaningful difference. And that is because of the partnerships and getting the word out together. We can't do this individually. So next slide, please. I'm going to finish today with some action items. I'll be super brief because I know I'm a little over time. I was yapping a mile a minute today. And so just to be super marketing at you on what you can do to support this work and how you can activate. Not only did you already share some amazing individual tips and challenges in the chat, but you can register for Food Waste Prevention Week 2025. That is now open and we can start to coordinate. You can also join our peer network where you can help the rubber meet the road when it comes to new ideas. We're looking at a university challenge this year where we have maybe UW versus WSU or additional colleges trying to raise awareness through strategic initiatives. And then of course our Use Food Well email. Anything we're doing is going through that email. So I want to make sure you all are connected to that. Next slide, please. Rounding out today with just a major thank you to my team. I am just a messenger in a lot of ways. And now that we've been able to expand out the team, we're actually able to dive into prevention, rescue, and recovery of food waste and wasted food in ways that we haven't been able to before. So shout out to everyone. And if you want to reach any of us, feel free to email the Food Center or email me directly, but you're honestly, because they're so great, you're going to get a response a lot more quickly if you reach out directly to the Food Center, and I'll put that in the chat. So thank you so much for having me, and I'll pass it back to Sam.
Thank you, Jade. If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and I'm sure Jade will answer it. We have a bit of time, so hopefully you can stick around for our Q&A later, maybe even our networking session. But until then, I'm going to pass it off to Cedar Grove and Jay, I believe.
Great, thanks, Sam. So my name is Jay Blasey. I'm the general counsel for Cedar Grove Composting. We are King County's only commercial composter permitted in the county. And I've been with Cedar Grove for going on 9 years. I'm the general counsel, legal department of one. I've met a ton of you. I recognize a lot of your names. I am a lawyer, but I also work on state policy, and I work with our cities and counties and contracting and all sorts of different things, regulatory wise, here in King County, also statewide and also nationally through the United States Composting Council. So that's just a little bit introduction. Today I'm presenting on organics collection in King County and contamination, which has been touched on a little previously in Tyler's presentation. So I'll be talking today about the complexities of that issue, what Cedar Grove's doing, and I think some ideas for progress in that area. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So Cedar Grove, for those who don't know, we've been composting since 1988 when the city of Seattle came to us looking to divert their yard waste and start a yard waste program. I think they offered maybe 15 to 20,000 tons and ended up bringing about 50,000 tons that year of yard waste. So at our core, we're an organics diversion company. We started in Maple Valley. We've developed that facility out through various iterations over the years in technology and types of composting. So we have a facility in Maple Valley and we have a facility in Everett. Maple Valley has a couple different types of composting technology. We've got a negative aeration system, a hybrid negative aeration system that moves through kind of a pie, if you've ever seen that overhead view of Cedar Grove. We've got a gore system, a smaller gore system, that's a gore cover, and then we've got a covered building. We put our commercial organics through our gore system in our building, and then we put more kind of residential yard debris through the negative air system. Our Everett facility uses only the gore cover system. So it's just dedicated to that. With the climate here, that's a great system because it shields from rain and the elements. There were some questions about processing capacity and the nuance there. Cedar Grove has solid waste handling permits and air permits for our facilities. And our I'll just talk about the solid waste permits, but our facility in Maple Valley is permitted to take 250,000 tons a year of organics, and our Everett facility is permitted to take 228,000 tons per year. The commenter, I think from Pierce County, was correct that available capacity isn't a perfect data point to look at because of the seasonality. We do get more material in the spring and more material in the fall. So it's pretty tough to reach to get to that limit. It takes some operational maneuvering in certain years, depending on how the season goes. So totaled up, Cedar Grove has 478,000 tons of permitted capacity, and I think last year we did around 320,000 tons of organics diverted. So we do have quite a bit of available capacity, even taking into account that kind of seasonality approach or concept, I guess. Where does Cedar Grove get our material? That's an important part of this conversation. We're a subcontractor. We have our two main hauling partners with long-term contracts are Republic Services and Recology. So if you live or work in King County, I'm sure you've seen their trucks running through many of the neighborhoods. They bring us a large portion of our residential feedstocks. We also have direct contracts with the city of Seattle and the city of Tacoma for yard debris and food waste. Our commercial feedstock is a little bit different because commercial recycling is an open market system. So as long as you have what's called a common carrier permit from the UTC, you can haul organic recyclables. And so Cedar Grove in 2005 went to our hauling partners and said, hey, like, we'd like to get involved in commercial composting. This is what kind of the cities and counties were asking for to start diverting that stream. And so we didn't get a ton of interest, so we decided to start our own hauling company. So maybe you've seen the Cedar Grove trucks driving around. We only haul from commercial businesses. Those businesses are, big as some of our biggest corporate customers to little restaurants and things of that nature. And then the last thing I would say is we're a member of the Composting Manufacturing Alliance. So we do accept certified compostable products that have been proven to break down in our system, and we rely on CMA for that. I am today here to talk about contamination, and what I can say about dealing with this is that it's a complicated issue and that needs to be addressed across the spectrum. It's not a set it and forget it type thing. I think I presented at this conference many years ago. I've got presentations on contamination, and it's an issue where there's no single thing to be done. There's a shared accountability into addressing the problem. And so today I'm going to kind of highlight some of the issues that we deal with and some of the things that we're doing, and I think some of the things that other folks are doing. My focus today mostly will be on commercial because commercial collection is what is Cedar Grove has more control over that. Again, the residential feedstocks, we have contracts. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but we have our haulers bring that material in. I would say, I don't have a slide on this, but I would say, I think as a recommendation on the residential component, it's going to be important, I think, going forward to continue to, and a lot of people here are doing this, we're talking about it today, but is do that education piece to the customer and also do potentially some enforcement, which is happening in some areas, and hopefully we can bring some consistency to that, but doing some enforcement curbside too through oops tags. City of Kirkland ran a large program on oops tags, and those things actually work, but it's something where, again, you've got to keep doing it. It's consistency over time, and making sure that we're staying vigilant on monitoring as much as we can everything that comes to the facility, because the more we can prevent coming in, the less contamination we'll have in that finished product. Next slide, please. You heard previously a little bit about the business organics management area, the BOMA map. And so our commercial collection, if you this map isn't ideal, but for Cedar Grove, our trucks, we pretty much will run a commercial route. I think Gig Harbor, you can see kind of carved out there. And then we have routes running in King County and Snohomish County and some in Pierce County. So we cover a large territory. We've been doing it, like I said, since 2005. There's obviously an environmental benefit to diverting organic waste, and a lot of businesses like to do it for that reason. There's also a financial incentive considering the cost of landfilling and the weight of food waste. Typically, we can save a customer money by downsizing their garbage container, right-sizing their bins, and servicing them depending on the type of business, how often they need to do it. We have just kind of some anecdotal information about the BOMA. The original threshold was 8 cubic yards. That's some of the biggest generators. I think they were already typically doing something with their organics, be it with Cedar Grove or someone else. It'll be 4 cubic yards in January. And then I can't remember exactly the year, but at some point it'll get to 96 gallons. So we should see more material coming in commercially. It'll be interesting to see how much we're able to divert. Next slide, please. So at Cedar Grove, we have to take a comprehensive approach to contamination. Like I said, there's no one point in time where you can solve the problem. You've got to work at every point of the system. So from a commercial perspective, when Cedar Grove signs up a customer, let's just say a restaurant, we send staff there who are going to help educate that customer about what goes in their bin, where their material goes. We're going to talk about compostables, and we're also going to talk about potentially offering signs for their restaurant or anything that we can do to help make sure the right materials get in the right bins. Our facilities, we process source separated organics only. So the 3 big contaminants, plastic, glass, metal, obviously those are not organic materials. They do not break down in the composting process. If they get in the feedstock, and if we can't get them out before the end of the process, they're going to move on. So those are the big things that we're trying to prevent. We have a team here, because we're vertically integrated. We're collecting the material and we're processing the material. We have a major incentive to fight contamination. And we have a team here, an outreach team that will go meet with any customer that we have. We'll provide bins. We can do stickers on the bins to help, because there's turnover at businesses and there's people coming and going, and the acceptance list can be different for businesses in where you live. So there's a lot of education and ongoing education required in this. We do trainings for our customers. We will do like Earth Day events, and we offer tours and waste audits and all sorts of things to make sure that that customer understands the implications of what they're buying and hopefully what they're sending to Cedar Grove. So after kind of that first touch point with the customer and ongoing communication, our drivers show up to the business, and we're going to inspect the bin as best we can to look for contamination. If it's heavily contaminated at the curb, we'll leave an oops tag. We'll contact that customer, and we'll engage in some of that education that we just discussed. That material then will be landfilled, or the customer can also sort the material, and then we can come back and pick it up. So that's kind of like the first step of trying to get contamination out. The education and support of that customer is critical. Most of them can't do it on their own. These are businesses that are focused on their business, and we want to help them as much as we can, be a resource for how they manage their material. There's a question here about giving fines. I think eventually we do, just because if we have to haul the material and landfill it, there's an increased cost. But I'm not actually sure if we do fines. I definitely don't think we do fines for the first incidents, maybe later. I'll have to check into that. So here's a Cedar Grove truck tipping some organics at our Maple Valley facility. And we'll go to the next slide, please. So one of the things, and here's something that maybe a driver might see when he opens a cart. In terms of large scale contamination, our biggest issue is just misuse of the container. In multifamily, you see that a lot. Maybe there's not enough space or what happens, but people are throwing bags of garbage in. We're getting plastics, we're getting glass. These are loads where we would not haul this load. This is too contaminated. So we would leave a tag, we would contact the customer, they could sort it, or we could take it to the landfill and engage in an education opportunity and hopefully clean up that stream. So that's kind of some of the things that we see in our bins. I'll go to the next slide, please. So residential, as I talked about, is a little different. We don't haul it, and I think our partners do a pretty good job of bringing us clean material. With the residential side, you've got the yard debris, which still people put contamination in, especially those plastic pots for gardening. So we still get contamination. You can see here bags of garbage, plastics, pots, films, glass is a big problem. You'd be surprised. There's the people who really care and are engaged in the resources and looking things up. And then there's people who are very indifferent and just throwing in bags of garbage and stuff like that. It can be discouraging to see, but we've invested heavily in our facilities and equipment to help deal with that situation. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So at our facility, our first phase is we've got a building monitor. So we've got a person whose job it is to monitor every load that comes in. They've got a tablet. They're examining the load that's being dumped. They're looking for garbage, large scale. Sometimes we get actual carts that come in. So all that material, even just a bag of garbage, once it gets ground up, you saw that picture earlier, those are just little pieces of a much bigger item that somehow got through our system. So we do everything we can to pull out as much contamination on the front end with our building monitor. Our rejection threshold, we're permitted to take up to 5% contamination by weight or volume. I think most sort studies I've seen, residential material is typically in the 2 to 3% range. But so we can tell when a load is heavily contaminated. If it's over 5%, we'll reject the load and we'll landfill it. You can't make good compost out of that. And then after it's ground up and starts going through the process, there's a picture here of our, we call it the Kraken screen. We named it that before the team was here, but it's a large beast of a machine. It costs multi-million-dollar investment. It's a vibratory deck screen, but it also includes 26 plastic suction points to pull off as much plastic as possible. I think we pull off about 30 pickup trucks worth of plastic film a week that we send to the Cedar Hills landfill with that screen. And then after that screen, we also rescreen material. So anytime you're handling material or trying to screen it or clean it up, there's cost to that process, and we do our best to invest in people and equipment to handle that contamination. We also have magnets that will pull metals off the process. So that's in that we recycle. So that's another stream that gets out. Those rigid plastics and glass act a lot like wood, and it's very hard to get certain products, contaminants out. Next slide, please. So finished products and end markets. Cedar Grove over the years has sold, I don't know how much, but we've sold to millions of different customers in the region. there are regulatory standards for finished compost and the amount of physical contaminants that can be in that. So we do a monthly test on our product. I'm trying to see here. I wrote it down. So the testing metric is less than 1% by weight total, not to exceed 0.25% plastic film by weight. So 0.25% plastic is a pretty stringent requirement to meet. And we continually meet that standard. Again, it's a recycled product. It's not going to be perfect. We have, our customer, the amount of people that get the service from Cedar Grove is massive. And it's, we try to get to as many people as possible to educate them and get it to do it right. But it's a massive undertaking, and it takes everyone. A lot of the folks here are working on that along with Cedar Grove. So the good news, this isn't all bad news about composting. I think in general, again, when I presented last time, I think composting and organics management was kind of like the third wheel, but now composting is getting a lot of attention. How important it is to divert organics. And so we've seen the market and demand for compost grow. I'm sure that has something to do with the economy as well. And the expectation for the finished product, people have different expectations. Our complaints for finished product have gone down significantly with our investments in our recent screening equipment and monitoring. But it's an ongoing battle, and we'll continue to try to provide the highest quality finished product. We heard from Kelsey about compost procurement. That's going to be a big component going forward, is compost use and all the different uses beyond just in your garden. Green stormwater infrastructure will be a huge one going forward that we're working on. And it'll be interesting to see and hope to see cities and local governments using compost in their parks and construction projects. Next slide, please. So a couple of things. It's hard here to talk. Oh, I guess my time's up. But
You can keep going, Jay.
okay, I'll keep going. I think
Yeah.
we're ahead of schedule. So
yeah,
I grappled with this slide a little bit coming in because it depends on who you're talking to, the audience, on what you can do to help. If you're talking, to the individual resident, and you've heard about this before, but because plastic is such a contaminant for us and it's a challenge to get out, reusables and durables are the number one recommendation, of course. Limit your use of single plastics when you can. It's a problem. We could talk about this all day. In our society, the amount of new products, consumerism it doesn't seem like that's going to slow down anytime soon, but obviously we can all play a role in that. The second suggestion is finding about the program in your area. Solid waste is a local control system. So each jurisdiction manages their program, and they're all a little bit different. You might work in Pierce County, you might live in King County. There's different rules, and you have different composters. So find out where your material goes, and find out what is on your acceptance list of your program. We tell our customers a lot that you've heard, when in doubt, throw it out. We also like to include when in doubt, find out. Cedar Grove's a resource, we hope, for business in cities and counties. So find out what's accepted and start that conversation. Using best sorting practices, I touched on a little, but if you work in a commercial building, maybe you get like a green team that takes ownership over that waste stream and uses signs and bin colors and things of that nature to make sure that, or to hope that people are putting the material in the right bins. That decision when you're sorting is critical. It happens quickly, and people get it wrong often. So the more people working on that, the better. And then the last point I would say is buying and using local compost is going to be a big part of this. The state of California passed a lot of a strong law on procurement in cities and counties. And one of the things that I heard at a presentation that they said, which resonated with me, was, we started buying our local compost. We were seeing contamination in it. And that really kind of made me see the light on, well, what can we do to help limit contamination? So kind of having skin in the game on that is helps, because then it turns from, oh, well, this is contaminated, I don't want it, to like, okay, this is our program, what can we do to improve it? And so we've seen leaps and bounds in King County since I've been here on education and compost use, and we're optimistic for the future of that as well. So I appreciate everyone's time and for coming to this summit. I'm here to answer questions about this. So thank
Thanks,
you for
Jay.
the opportunity.
Yeah, we have quite a bit of time for Q&A for any of our speakers. I know that a lot of folks have asked questions and they've been answered, but if you have any questions now, feel free to drop it in the chat or raise your hand and you can ask your question directly.
I would also ask if the presenters who went today could turn their cameras on so folks can see your faces. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Jay, you
Great.
absolutely can.
I'm going to ask one for Tyler because I learned something new. Can you talk a little bit more about growing in compost? Because I've heard that can be a challenge. So I'm interested to know about what you know a little bit more about that.
Totally. So yeah, the deep mulching, there's a lot of what we learned came out of the UK because gardeners there do it a lot. And I don't know specifically why they do it there. And the big things that people complain with compost, so there is real worry about compost tends to be relatively high phosphorus. So if you use too much, you can end up with phosphorus buildup problems. But again, a lot of that comes from traditionally in agriculture using a lot of horse manures, which are higher in phosphorus, I believe, than most municipal compost is, and much higher than forestry-based compost. The other thing that people worry about a lot is like so much of what we know about agriculture is based on working with amending depleted soils in the Midwest, basically in California. So like people will tell you that if your organic content in your soil gets higher than like 9%, that your crops will just fall over. The Tukwila mucks in the Sammamish Valley, our native organics are like 19%. And then we piled compost on top of that. And again, we grow 90 different crops out of that. So like they grow quite successfully. There are some things, like I said, like sort of figuring out the tech. You have to compact the compost because if it's too loose, like it doesn't hold water well and you'll air prune the roots. And I think one of the big things there too is farms don't really do anything until it's been proven somewhere. And they also need equipment to do what they're doing. And right now, if you want to deep mulch, we do it all by hand. You can't just buy a pull behind tractor that will go through, put out your paper, put out your compost, and boom, your bed's ready to go and plant it. But yeah, we grow tons of crops. We grow lovely tomatoes. We grow pretty much everything you could think of. We do it all in compost. And our biggest problem is the underlying soil kind of sucks, not that the compost sucks.
Well, I didn't mention this during my presentation, but Cedar Grove, you talked about showing the uses and showing that it works. So Cedar Grove has an organic farm in Redmond called Sound Sustainable Farms with 60 acres. I don't know. Have you been there before?
I haven't, but I've talked to them a few times.
So it would be awesome if you could come out, because I think it would be really cool. We don't grow direct in compost like you do. So that's a really interesting concept that I'd love to learn more about. So thanks for the presentation.
From Eleni, sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. She said, I don't recommend giving fines to customers. What I recommend is better education and training in multiple languages and better community engagement. In seeing all the various presentations, nearly all are very Eurocentric. What are the plans to end barriers to hiring, educating BIPOC folks? Another observation that there are weeds, yet plantain, nettle, and dandelions are traditional foods, and we do not see them as weeds. They are our relatives. Those in positions of leadership and power need to learn from Indigenous, tribal, and Pacific Islander communities. How about partnering with us as consultants? This is my feedback and food for thought, pun intended.
I answered quickly in the chat, so I just want to say thank you for that comment. That's a very strong piece of feedback and one that's really needed. So I appreciate the time for you putting that in there. I do know some of our programs are working to do better in this area. It's definitely not enough and an area that we all need to improve. In terms of our roles in, talking more about things that like more Eurocentric communities see as weeds. I don't know, Tyler, if you hear anything or have conversations about like other different culturally relevant food items. I'd love to hear on that too.
Yeah, so we grow a lot of different varieties, and some of those are crops that again people here wouldn't really think of. And we do explore some crops, like we sell some nettle in the beginning of the summer that we actually forage from a nearby plot. It's pretty great. And the problem with a lot of these things is, especially the really exotic crops, we really struggle to sell them. So as much as we could grow them, it's like one of the things that I was realizing this year is like beets are an exotic crop to like 80% of produce consumers. They've never cooked a beet. And you can find a beet in every grocery store in the United States. So like really a lot of the challenge for us is sort of educating customers on what do you do with it? How do you do it? Like if they haven't seen a recipe on Instagram of what do I do with nettles and there's something they can pick up a hamburger helper box and throw them in, they don't eat them. And so that's really a huge part of what we find when trying to introduce people to crops that they're not familiar with, is really that education piece. They just struggle to utilize them.
We have some additional comments. Rick said dairy manure is generally quite high in phosphorus. Robbie said Jesse Frost of No Till Growers and Charles Dowding both have great info on deep mulch systems. And a question from Calvin to Jay. Do you still accept compostable serviceware and packaging? If so, has that made it more difficult to spot plastic contamination? Do you have difficulty accepting those items?
Yeah, so I didn't want to lose that question in the chat, but to answer that, yes, we do accept them still mostly from our commercial and business customers, and it absolutely makes it more difficult. We've been engaged in legislation with a lot of the stakeholders here to try to make compostable products easily and readily identifiable for the consumer and for the composter. That usually involves tinting or striping or labeling in a way that makes it very simple and clear that something's compostable when it's not. I don't have them on hand, but oftentimes at these types of panel presentations, someone will hold up a clear cup that's compostable and a clear cup that's not, and you have no idea. It's impossible to tell the difference. So we're working hard to bring clarity to that issue, but taking compostables again adds another layer of complexity because of the confusion on some of those products that are tinted green or what have you. I also saw a question, I think from City of Bellevue. I do have some data on that. I need to find, I have a document. Let me get you that. I'll search for it. We have some general ideas. I mean, when these laws came out, that was one of the first questions is like, okay, so who makes 8 yards a week? Who makes 4 yards a week? The 8 yard a week that's a big customer. That's a grocery store. That's a big organic waste stream. I think, and I'm just from memory, a 4 yard a week, I think we felt like was a large commercial campus type business or potentially like a larger restaurant. And then school districts schools and schools are right in the middle of those two, if that helps. So let me see if I can find our document on that, and I'll try to get that to you.
And I think another question for you, Jay, from Steve. How often does Cedar Grove measure and monitor persistent herbicides and pesticides in the compost?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I'm not sure if we test all of our finished product. And I'm not sure exactly what of those particulars we test for. I know clopyralid, excuse me, I said that wrong, was an issue years ago, and Washington State banned it in residential use. And then I think it's still composters that accept hay and bedding still get that. We don't accept that, but I'm not sure. I'll have to get back to that person if you could maybe make a note of that. I'll start making notes of my follow-up homework for today.
As a farmer, I've never heard about worries about like copyralid in municipal composts. Like it really does seem to be primarily like if using manure-based compost and using feed. It is interesting to hear this ban in the state because I've heard that, but not from somewhere I could really rely. And my worry had always been, you know, where people getting their silage from Oregon, Idaho, Montana, or somewhere. It's good to know.
Yep. And Jay, that's Steve Bergman from Zero Waste Vashon.
Great.
For you. Tony had a comment. At Utopia, Washington, we do farming as we don't see our Pacific Islanders culturally relevant food in the food we pick up from our partners. I am going to mention some of the Pacific Islanders common food that we were able to grow in my presentation tomorrow, and they're still searching for more. So a little sneak preview for some of you folks coming tomorrow.
I had a question for Jay. So I'm a little curious. This is the first time I've heard about these new regulations requiring companies of a certain size to compost. Is there worry there that, like, I mean, the law needs to exist because these people don't just naturally want to compost? Is there worry that these are going to be sort of like, for lack of a better word, shittier customers? Like they're more likely to put in plastics and things like that because they just don't care. They're only doing it because they have to.
I mean, there's always a worry on that type of thing. I think with businesses, when you say it, let's just say a challenging customer, you know, it's typically not one person. It's typically a group of people at a business that's doing it. So I would think that there's going to be folks who are doing it at home and want to do it, and it's not a big deal. And maybe for some it isn't, but I don't envision kind of like the disgruntled one person who's like, I don't want to do this, and now I'm going to do a really bad job at it. I think it'll probably be the same as we have even with our customers who want to do it right. Is you've got to monitor what's coming in, you've got to engage, you've got to give them feedback, and you've got to continue to provide support through outreach and education for that customer. So there'll be a learning curve, but I'm not like, I wouldn't say I'm super worried, but it'll be, yes, I think generally there'll probably be a little bit of a learning curve there.
A comment from Rick. Many composters stopped taking livestock waste during the clopyralid scare and no longer take livestock waste. I've heard that livestock producers are tougher to work with and complain about tipping fees. Any additional questions or comments for Jay, Tyler, Jade?
Because I've got a question for someone here in chat. Does anyone know if
I think you might have been a little breaking up there.
I'm
Tyler.
sorry. I said this might be more of a question for some of the folks in the chat here who might know, but is it verifiable that those compounds are banned in Washington? If anyone knows, then feel free to message me. I'd love to hear, because we're really curious what this is doing. It's a real scare. It's incredibly expensive to test. Once it's on our site, you don't really have anything to do with it. I'm putting a stock.
Yeah, I think Tyler, you were breaking up there still. If you want to drop it in the chat, I'm sure folks will see it and respond. Great. Well, there are no more. Let's see. Rick said, I believe clopyralid was banned in residential use, but is still used in commercial agriculture. Great. If there are no additional questions or comments at this time, I can pass it off to you, Kelsey, for some of our wrap up.
Yep. Can you pull up the slide, please? Next one, please. So I just want to say thank you for everyone being here. We're definitely ahead of schedule. All of our presenters were fantastic and really stuck with their 20-minute timeline. So with that, we have the gift of time for a couple of options of how to move forward. So as Sam mentioned at the beginning of today's presentation, we will have an optional networking breakout session option with our speakers. If our speakers who are here can stay on for a little bit, we'd love to assign you a breakout room, and then folks can self-select into your room to chat with you or just kind of talk about that topic in general. If folks don't really have a particular speaker that they want to talk to, we'll have another breakout room open for general conversation and networking. And speakers, if no one hops into your rooms, you're also welcome to join the general room and hop around. Sam will launch that shortly, but before she does that, I just want to let folks know that when you exit the call now or later, a survey will be prompted for you to kind of give us feedback on how you think this went. If you can't fill it out right now, you need to hop in another call. We'll be sending out a form survey for folks to fill out in the thank you email. So it's up to you. And there will be an additional form/survey if you are also attending tomorrow's session from 9 to 1. So you're welcome to wait if you're attending both to fill it out just once instead of twice. It is up to your preference. We'll happily accept either or. And before I give my last notes, just a preview for tomorrow. We will be having the same time frame of a 9 to 1. First, we are going to have Roma Jean Thomas from Feed 7 Generations. We're going to have Tony from Utopia, Washington, who's had some really great questions and comments in the chat. Thank you, Tony. Heather Trim from Zero Waste Washington will be joining us. We'll have speakers from Renewal Food Bank on food rescue. And then Kate Kurtz and Dave Keeney from City of Seattle and King County Wastewater Treatment Division are going to present on a report that I, with them and a couple consultant teams, have been working on of the ecosystem services of compost. So kind of assigning a dollar value to the environmental services that compost provides in different applications and benefits that come out of that. So highly suggest folks, if they can, to come tomorrow as well. It will be recorded as well. After these 2 days are complete, again, we'll have that thank you follow-up email with the survey, the recordings, PDF of the slides, and then you're welcome to reach out to any of the speakers once you get those slides. If you're still having additional questions that aren't getting answered, reach out to compost@kingcounty.gov. Given that we have an hour and a half until we are supposed to be done, again, huge kudos to our presenters for being really on time. If folks feel good to have about 45 minutes open, we can leave those breakout rooms that open that long until folks hop out. Again, completely optional. So if it's 11:30, we'll close them about 12:15 and just give the gift of time back. Enjoy your lunch for those on the West Coast. Sam, if I'm not forgetting anything, could you please pop up the self-select for the breakout rooms? And again, I just want to thank all of our presenters and everyone that attended today. Great participation and engagement. We really appreciate all of you. Thank you.